Hello, my name is Michelle Legault, and I'm the Executive Director of the CSLA. Je suis Michelle Legault, la Directrice Générale de l'ADAPTerre. Bienvenue à un nouveau programme de formation continue à l'intention de nos membres nommé ADAPTerre. Naviguer et concevoir pour l'adaptation. Welcome to landADAPT, Landscape Architects Navigating and Designing for Adaptation, CSLA's new continuing education program funded by NRCan. I would like us to begin with land acknowledgement. Please place your feet on the ground and breathe the air at your location. We acknowledge that we're gathering today from coast to coast to coast on the lands of the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people and their governments. Though we're meeting virtually today, we acknowledge that the head office of the CSLA is in unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. We're thankful to work and live on these lands.
Hi everyone, I am Hope Parnham. I'm the Manager of Advocacy and Strategic Affairs with the CSLA. It's my pleasure to host this first webinar in our new CSLA landADAPT series. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you. We are very pleased to offer this event today with live translation services. So you can access this service by clicking the Wordly link. I think Rebecca is going to be putting it in the chat for you. Or if you already have Wordly connected, you should see it in the top right-hand corner on your screen. Please use the Q&A link to submit your questions during the presentation. Our speaker is bilingual, so feel free to post your questions in either French or English. And today's presentation will be recorded and the video will be made available on the CSLA Continuing Education website afterwards. So for those of you attending live, we will also distribute a certificate of attendance for your continuing education credits. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge that this event is supported by the Natural Resources Canada Climate Change Adaptation Program, and we are very grateful for their support. So now it is my great privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Joanna Eyquem. Joanna is an internationally recognized leader in climate adaptation and nature-based solutions with 25 years experience in Europe, North America, and Western Africa. She holds a Master's of Science in Environmental Technology and a Bachelor of Science in Geography. She is professionally qualified in both Canada and the UK as a professional geoscientist, envision sustainability professional, chartered water and environmental manager, and chartered environmentalist. Currently, Joanna serves as the Managing Director of Climate Resilient Infrastructure at the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation, where her work focuses on reducing risks from flooding, erosion, and extreme heat. Her portfolio includes developing national guidance on climate resilience and advancing the integration of natural assets into financial and sustainability reporting. So please join me in welcoming Joanna. Over to you, Joanna. Oh, you're muted.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for that introduction, Hope. So Hope and I have been working together for a number of years now, and it's a real joy to speak to landscape architects who I also work with professionally in my job as a consultant previously. So know that I have got this kind of practical background. So if you want to ask more techie questions, I'm completely up for that. So I'm just going to share my slides so that hopefully you can see them. So the title of the presentation today is on working with nature as normal, and I'm really happy that you've chosen this as your first landADAPT webinar, first in the series. So that's great. I feel very honored, and I'm glad we're leading with nature. So I'm going to try and demonstrate progress and examples of efforts to mainstream consideration of nature-based solutions, ranging from strategic approaches and technical guidance to kind of more on the ground municipal management and financial reporting. So there's going to be a lot of information. I have a presentation that I can make available in PDF, and there's a lot of links to follow. So if you don't catch some of the resources, all of them are linked in the presentation, and my aim is for you to go away with more resources than you had before that you can use in your day-to-day work. So I'm going to come at this from a very personal perspective. I've been working on nature-based solutions for 25 years now, pretty much like from day one of my job, though obviously the term nature-based solutions wasn't really used back then, but that was essentially what I was working on. So I have this kind of outline, which is roots, so that you get to know a little bit about where I'm coming from, some of the background knowledge about nature-based solutions, optimism, because I think, we all need a big buoy up in nature-based solutions and kind of inspiration to go forward to make this mainstream. And then at the end, I have both an action to-do list for myself, so you know what I'm working on, and also an action list for yourselves. So to start with, this is me, I think this is like one of my first days on the job in the UK, where it rains all the time, when I basically started as a fluvial geomorphologist, and I used to spend my days walking up and down and surveying rivers for kilometers and kilometers with my right in the rain pad. And you can see how much I enjoy it, and I still enjoy it, though I spend a little less time outside at the moment. So this is kind of person that I got to this kind of area from, and it's really from my love of the outdoors and my love of knowing how natural processes work. And I think that one of the keys in my life is balance. I always feel I'm kind of balancing different things. So I've got some of the things that I'm balancing are northern and southern England. So my mum was from the north and my dad was from the south. So my mum says Bath and my mum says Bath. And so that was always a thing. French and English. My husband is French and I am English, and that makes for a fair few good discussions, particularly about rugby. I always work between engineers and ecologists, and as a geomorphologist, I feel that that balance was part of my role. Balancing grey and natural infrastructure, because we're not saying we just need natural infrastructure, but we do need to balance between those two. And I put people within nature, because I don't see people as a part of nature, but as part of nature. But obviously we have kind of disturbed that balance, and that's something that I'm hoping to work towards restoring a little bit in the job that I do. And this comes, so this is a geomorphological diagram that, if there's some geomorphologists on the call, they will recognize this. This is Lane's balance, and it basically describes the dynamic equilibrium of a channel formed in response to discharge, which is the bucket, which is essentially water on the right, and sediment on the left. So basically what you get, if you change one of those things, you shift the balance. And I really like this diagram because it's really, the balance of river form is in equilibrium with the conditions, and those conditions are in some terms natural, but a lot of what humans do is also affecting that equilibrium. And what we get as a result, that's a result of our actions as well. Just to illustrate that, I have some, this is how we have treated streams in the past. I'm a river scientist, so this speaks to me. So the first one is how I have dynamite streamlined streams. In 1935, it basically says crooked streams are a menace to life and crops. So basically, we need to straighten them and dynamite them and get them to do what we want. And this kind of controlling paradigm, thinking that we can basically tailor nature to our needs. And then a slightly more recent example, is this kind of for A, B, and C in the photographs here. It's 1932, 1964, and 2006, and not that long ago. So you can see how this stream that was naturally meandering, there was a little bit of a road here. There was a bit of a straightening going on. There was a little bit more straightening. And then suddenly in 2006, we thought it was really good to put a housing development right in the middle of the floodplain. And guess where there's some erosional problems, probably here and here. Rivers don't really do right angles in nature, and there's a reason for that. So part of the problems that we had with the stream management is because we've done something wrong to it, and it's not a stable landform. So I think this is just to demonstrate that the natural balance is sensitive to change. So if we do something like reduce sediment load, or we increase the slope of a stream by straightening it, or we increase the amount of water coming through it, then we basically tip that balance, and we can see erosion happening as a result of our actions. So that's just kind of to set the scene of the importance of natural processes and the kind of response to our actions. And I think when natural systems are out of balance, our economy and our well-being suffers. So probably most people have seen this graphic, which is about the costs of extreme weather and shows the upward bending curve. Obviously, there is climate change layered on top of this curve, but there's also the actions of land use management and changing land use and degradation of natural systems also underlies this trend. So the actions that we are taking are basically undermining our natural resilience to climate risks like flooding, coastal erosion, extreme heat, etc. And, the losses that we see are in part a function of that, as well as climate change. So most losses are also not insured. So you can see this year, 2004 we're set for the record of, I think we were at $8.4 billion in catastrophic losses this year. And that's only what's insured. Most losses are not insured. So we estimate it's about 3 to 4 times that figure in terms of actual costs. And obviously losses are not all financial, particularly with extreme heat. But the mental strains of flooding and any impacts of loss of life we've seen from several flood events this year are not quantified here. So, this kind of trend of natural degradation as well as climate change is having an impact on us. And so restoring balance within our natural systems and working with rather than controlling natural processes, I believe, is central to our future well-being. And that's the belief that underpins my work on natural infrastructure. So just so that you know where I'm coming from, that's who I am. So we're now going to go forward for a little bit more of the knowledge section. And so hopefully I'll set the scene and give you some resources that you can lean on when you want to kind of go to definitions forward in your work. So firstly, I'd like to come to what is a nature-based solution. So I think the word is bandied around a lot, and it means different things to different people. I've heard people say that they're against nature-based solutions because they basically think that they're carbon offsets, or they think that they're just planting trees. But that is not true at all. So there's many aspects of what is a nature-based solution, as you can see in this graphic, which is from the IUCN. So the global standard for nature-based solutions is basically actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively. And I think that the key thing is providing benefits to human well-being and biodiversity at the same time. So that's one of the key things. I think a lot of the people who focus on nature-based solutions are only focusing on nature-based solutions for one challenge. Like I focus mainly on nature-based solutions for climate adaptation, but there are a whole bunch of nature-based solutions like pollination, things like that are not, and I'm not going to talk about today. So I'm only going to be talking really about more infrastructural nature-based solutions, and particularly those that address climate risks. But you can see that the definition itself is much wider than that. Another term that people probably have heard is green infrastructure and natural infrastructure. So green infrastructure in Canada is actually being used to refer to infrastructure that actually reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So you can think of a public transit project would be called green infrastructure because it's reduced emissions, whereas natural infrastructure is really, ecosystems based. And this kind of continuum is actually in the standard that we have on specifications for natural asset inventories, which is the first standard that we have on natural assets. And it basically describes everything from natural assets being intact ecosystems like forests, wetlands, water bodies, like rivers or lakes, then enhanced assets being, maybe constructed wetlands or naturalized spaces. Sometimes maybe parks might fall into this area. And then down to more engineered assets, which are essentially engineered systems that use vegetation to kind of mimic natural processes, such as bioswales or green walls or permeable pavements. So, some you can see there's it's not like a very clear-cut definition, but we see this continuum of what is natural infrastructure. So what I'll be talking about today is mainly towards the natural assets and potentially some enhanced assets when we've restored systems. So natural infrastructure provides services to people. Typically, they're divided into what we call provisioning services, which are things like wood or shellfish. They're kind of uses or goods, if you like, that we use for our benefit. There's also regulation support services, so things like flooding and erosion regulation, temperature control, air and water quality regulation fall under here. And then cultural services, you might think of recreation or aesthetic value. And I really like this figure actually is adapted from the discute review, which basically shows that biodiversity is really important as a component of natural capital or ecosystems, but also the abiotic processes, the water, the sediment, the air, those processes are really important. And I think sometimes when we hear people talking about biodiversity and the value of biodiversity, actually biodiversity is kind of only one aspect of the services of nature, because if we leave out the abiotic part, we might miss some of those really important regulation services, which ultimately support people and support our economy. Natural infrastructure works at different scales as well. Essentially in Canada, we have focused fairly heavily on looking at how we can work with infrastructure and climate adaptation at a community level, at a particular building level. We have less guidance, and that's an area that I've been working on is basically at the river basin scale or the coastal cell scale or the landscape scale. So if we want to affect things like river flooding, for example, we actually need to work at the scale of the watershed to make the most of the nature-based solutions that we can use, because the actual solutions, such as afforestation or restoring wetlands upstream, might not be at the community that you're trying to protect. So without working at that larger functional scale, you might miss some of the appropriate solutions. So I think that's a really important point to make here. And as you probably know, because most of you are from Canada, there has been rapidly evolving guidance in the space of nature-based solutions. So just in the last few years, we've seen international guidance on flooding and flood risk management using nature-based features. There's this other document here, which is from CSA Group, which looks at the state of play in Canada. This report on coasts that the Intech Centre issued a couple of years ago. Looking at watersheds, this is a report from last year, looking at urban heat islands and how we use natural infrastructure there, and also how natural asset management can be basically integrated into asset management. And I would say, we're at the start of this in Canada. We're kind of catching up a little bit on the international scale, but nature-based solutions are a key focus for future standards development. So expect more basically in the coming years. Oops. So natural infrastructure can be used to reduce flooding, erosion, and drought. I've added drought in here. We haven't done as much work on drought, but I know other researchers are working on drought and how we work with nature-based solutions there. Essentially, what we're doing here is looking at ecosystems and natural features that store water, that slow down water, that reduce the volume of peak runoff, particularly important when we're looking at the timing of different tributaries at a catchment scale, for example, that can increase flooding downstream. And they also help to reduce soil and river erosion. All kind of positive benefits there. And a lot of this is to reverse some of the development or drainage land use decisions that we've made in the past. For example, in many catchments for agricultural, we have drained fields and straightened rivers and basically tried to get the water to drain off as quickly as possible, which has in many cases made flooding worse downstream. And in urban areas, obviously, we've made a lot of impervious surfaces, so the water doesn't have anywhere to go apart from into our grey infrastructure system. So helping to soak up some of that water using nature-based infrastructure is also important. This diagram, I should say, is from a document that one of my friends in the UK developed. And in the actual original document, you can actually click on all of these solutions and get some information about them, which is pretty useful. Natural infrastructure also reduces extreme heat, which is a problem in Canada and a growing issue. Like if we compare city areas with rural areas or kind of areas where we have natural infrastructure, there can be a really significant temperature difference from 3 to 10 degrees hotter in the city area. And so when we're looking at how we're going to cope with extreme temperatures going forward, natural infrastructure is the key consideration. And I would also say the way in which we work with natural infrastructure or like nature-based solutions, I think the approach is also different. So we looked at this kind of, I don't know, control paradigm of how we work with nature in the historical times, because we think that as humans we can tell nature what to do and it will do it and everything will be fine. But with climate change, actually a lot of natural systems are getting more dynamic, and we're realizing we really can't control nature, and we've caused a problem in many areas. But so we have this kind of language around natural hazard management. So you might think of protecting people from the natural hazard, if be that flooding or erosion, avoiding, so basically zoning and not building in certain at-risk areas, retreat, so looking at which are high-risk areas we shouldn't be, we should actually be kind of taking our infrastructure away from those areas to limit damage in the future, or accommodate, so that we know it's going to flood, but we actually make sure that the infrastructure, what we have, is not going to be damaged when it's flooded, and we can clean up quickly after. So those are kind of the old school names, and it really sees kind of us and nature against each other. So it's like retreat from nature, move away. Whereas I actually found the Sea to City project, they really thought about they worked with Indigenous nations, and they basically rewrote the language. So basically looking at people and nature adapting together for mutual benefit. And so the language they were talking about was more kind of acknowledge. So acknowledge the risks and basically make sure that things are done in a way that you're not causing adverse damage to either people or nature. Restore, kind of restoring the connection between people and nature, and hosts. So inviting nature back into our cities, which I thought was really powerful. So I wanted to share that with you. So now I'm getting into the optimistic bit, after some of the knowledge sharing. So why I'm optimistic about our ability to mainstream nature-based solutions, I'm going to give you a few examples. I think the new tools just keep coming, and we're working very hard on making that so, actually. So just recent tools that you'll probably have seen this year. There's a new guide on nature is infrastructure, on how to practically include natural assets in asset management plans. That's a really good guide to look at how in a kind of a municipality or like a river basin authority can actually include nature as infrastructure. Might be interesting for some of the landscape architects to also appreciate how that process works. There's also this new guide on coastal nature-based infrastructure, which is a Canadian design guide, which is also very technical. So if you're looking for details, that's where to go. There's also a good section on kind of existing guidance, so you can use it as a bit of a library as well. And we have a new standard on coastal flood risk assessment for buildings and infrastructure that integrates nature-based infrastructure as well in the way it approaches things. Coming in next year, we also have shoreline management planning guidance, which is at that coastal cell scale, which I'm working on with the Standards Council of Canada. There's a coastal project options appraisal guidance document coming as well, which is from Standards Council and I think Climate Risk Institute leading with consortium there. So watch out for that project. The National Research Council are producing a similar design guide for rivers to join the coastal guide. And we're also delivering municipal flood resilience in action training with FCM next year in January and February. And so mentioning that, one of the things that I've tried to do is actually integrate natural infrastructure and kind of how we might approach nature-based solutions in tools in general, because I think we don't just want tools for natural infrastructure, we want it to be normal across all infrastructure considerations. So as an example, one of the tools that I worked on was the Municipal Flood Risk Checkup, which is a new tool that we launched this year. And basically, it provides an approach for municipalities to look at identifying flood hazards, looking at how they're analyzing risks and how they're reducing risks, and basically answering 50 questions to produce a scorecard and basically an assessment of how they're progressing in each of those areas. And they get kind of visuals of a web diagram and overview to see how they're doing and how they should be prioritizing action going forward. But as part of that, so this is one of the questions in the Municipal Flood Risk Checkup, and it's all about natural asset management. So whether the municipality has an asset management plan that addresses the role of natural assets in managing flood risk. So as part of their flood risk management plan, they should address what the role of natural assets is and how they're investing in those assets moving forward. So that's an example of kind of mainstreaming, as I see it. Another example in the same tool, we ask about whether the municipality is actually implementing coastal or shoreline flood management and whether they're looking at natural infrastructure solutions, whether they're looking at non-structural solutions as well, so that that's part of their normal thinking about how we approach rather than just going to a grey solution as the default. So that's just a couple of examples. I'd say another reason for optimism is that we're seeing a wider audience or new partners listening to kind of us talk about natural infrastructure and being interested in hearing what we're saying. And those are in kind of public policy, finance and accounting spheres, which, can be quite powerful in how we direct finances. So just some examples here. There's a CD Howe Institute Intelligence memo, which is, they focus on public policy. So there's a link here that you can read that if you are interested. I also spoke, and I know the Canadian Institute of Actuaries have actually done quite a lot of work on addressing nature. So these are the people who put a financial value on risk, who are very concerned about nature. So that is also powerful. And also, there's also a draft standard on tangible natural resources out at the moment from the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, or IPSASB is the acronym. So, accountants are really looking at how we can actually address putting a financial value on some of these ecosystem services in our accounting systems. The ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, is also looking at nature and how businesses should be disclosing on addressing nature-related risks. So that's all stuff to come. At a more local level, which may be closer to the work you're doing, we're also seeing a growth in local governments doing natural asset management and making disclosures in financial reporting. So now there's over 150 local governments are actually doing something about inventorying or assessing the condition of or valuing their natural assets, and that includes our largest cities. This map is actually not published yet, so you get a little bit of a sneak preview. We've updated this map, so you can see there's actually a large concentration in British Columbia, where NAI really first started, and Ontario, where asset management planning is actually regulated and compulsory. So you can see that we have growth hotspots in that, but overall an increase in activity. And the next step, so if you want to see about kind of the basics, we already have a report out on getting nature on the balance sheet, but exciting kind of in January next year, which I'm rapidly finishing off at the moment, we have some natural asset disclosures guidance for local government. So basically, if local governments want to put this in the reports, what kind of things should they be reporting on, and what indicators and metrics should they be using? And we had over 200 contributors to the project, so I'm really grateful to, and a lot of CPAs very active in that area. So look forward to that. And then the other thing, I think, reason for optimism is seeing large projects on the ground. So the River Don Mouth Naturalization Project has been a project that I've been following since 2009 when I first moved to Canada. And it's essentially a renaturalization of the mouth of the river for flood risk management purposes, but also part of a huge urban regeneration project that provides access to public green space and really kind of reclaims land from industrial kind of contaminated land previously. I was lucky enough to visit the site back in, I think it was a couple of years ago now, and I know that they've recently let the water in and connected the river. So this has been really exciting to see this project unfold, and it's taken more than 20 years to get it on the ground, but seeing that on the ground is inspiration to other people that this can be done. And this is a really big project. You can see it from, you know, if you look from above, you can really see the site on the ground. And then another tool that which is also kind of a smaller scale, is people can actually do things on their own lot. And I know that the Intech Centre provide quite a lot of guidance to residents. And actually we have tools for residents on how they can actually work with nature at home to reduce climate risk. And I think this is really key to know that heat and flood protection actually is very complementary. So the approaches that we have, you know, depaving, creating a rain garden, or kind of having a green roof, or green, like having trees to provide shade, but also soak up water. All of those things help for flooding and extreme heat, and every little helps. So if every lot does their little bit, we can really help in creating a more spongy city, and one that's also shelters people from extreme heat. But the approach is different if we're in a wildfire protection zone, where we want to limit fuels from the house. So you can see kind of contrasting. And I know that you already had a wonderful presentation about wildfire as well. So, so I think tools for residents also important, because we need everybody on board. So I have 3 thoughts for scoping action. The first is that municipalities and communities are on the front lines of managing climate and nature-related risks, and local action is key, and that's where you guys can help really in kind of helping shape the discussion on which options are the best options to implement. Landscape architects can use nature-based solutions for both climate risk management, so looking at flooding or coastal erosion or extreme heat, for example, but you can also use them to maximize benefits to communities. So I think those other benefits, for example, the recreational benefits that grey infrastructure just doesn't deliver, we need to really count those benefits and weigh the options more fairly, so that we get the best return for our investment in infrastructure. And I think that leads into the third point, that making the value of nature services transparent can help us make better choices. So where we might it's the easy option to just go to the default kind of riprap that everybody knows. But if we think about it a bit more in a bit more detail, or with a more multidisciplinary team, we can actually provide something that's better, that provides something for biodiversity, whilst also providing the stability that's required. And also, I think we can work with nature to restore relationships with nature, to reconnect people with nature, and with each other, because I see working with nature and inviting nature back into particularly our urban areas, as a key part of reconciliation. Because I know most First Nations groups I've spoken to have they've said how much they value their connection to nature, and that's really missing in many of our urban environments at the moment. So I promised an action list to end, which I'm headed towards now. So in terms of my to-do list, the things that I'm thinking about for 2025 are engaging with provinces and territories. So at the federal government level, we've seen quite a lot of work from the infrastructure, now Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, are very interested in natural infrastructure. We've also seen a lot of action at the local government level, but less with provinces and territories, who are also large landholders. So I think that's important. Embedding consideration of natural infrastructure as normal in decision-making for infrastructure in general, including for adaptation within all levels of government. So just a small to-do there. Mainstreaming natural asset management. I am on the I'm chair of the board of the Natural Assets Initiative, who are working really hard at this. And we want to take that forward in 2025 and really get very national. And then bridging natural asset accounting, so public sector accounting, and nature-related risk management, which is what the private sector is focused on at the moment. But there's a link between those two things. So that's my to-do list. What I would like you to work on or think about is how you can work from green to grey when considering infrastructure options. Because I feel when we're planning infrastructure or kind of designing things, often we kind of put the grey solution as the normal solution first, and then we try and shoehorn in nature or natural infrastructure options, whereas really we should be starting from, what can we do with green infrastructure, and where do we actually need grey infrastructure, and can we reduce our maintenance costs in doing so. Number two, I think, is actively seeking ways to restore natural processes and not only appearances, and reconnect people with nature. And I think from the natural process side, I've done a lot of restoration projects, and the problem is we want to restore river meanders. We don't actually want the river to move, which is what the river would normally do. So where we have space, we actually do want to restore erosion as a process and natural movement of rivers. So if you're working on restoration projects and you have the space, then we need to design for dynamic systems and not static systems, because nature is not static. Number three is consider natural asset management in your work and encourage communities to start their journey. So we have 150 communities who have already started, but there's about 3,600 communities in Canada, and we want them all on the journey. So if you can do your bit, that would be great. And number four, share your stories of success working with nature. I think great case studies and pictures, like before and after pictures with nature, or kind of people's reconnection with nature, make really powerful stories. And for myself as well, I think I always come back to this question: what else can we achieve through adaptation? Because we're looking at reducing climate risk, or I am in my day job. But what if we approach tackling climate change by focusing on different ways we can also make life better while reducing the risk? So adaptation is actually an opportunity to change things for the better. And the natural shift will take us there. And this is a really good article from the Washington Post about that perspective, which is linked in the presentation. So I'm just going to leave this up here while we take some questions, but basically it's just to say that we have a lot of resources at the Intech Centre. They're all free, and we want you to use them, and they're all linked in the presentation that we'll get after. But yeah, hopefully you'll find something useful that can like improve your work and make you interested. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Joanna. That was great. Full of resources. We will certainly make use of those on our new resource library that we're creating for our website. We do have a number of questions just coming in, but one of the ones that came in early on when you were talking about your definitions was really about calling natural assets as assets, and how do we make the argument for the rationale or how to convince developers and clients that these are assets and they have value. So from the economic perspective or the economic argument for.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we're working on, right? So to standardize this so that we have a consistent methodology. But I would say that, already several communities have done that natural asset valuation exercise. And even if we can only value certain services, valuing, like, for example, the water retention service often is very valuable that we're not taking into account. If we can value those services and provide a transparent methodology, that can be really powerful. I think just saying it, people don't necessarily believe it. They need to see those dollar values. And then even when we see the dollar values, sometimes they're so huge. They're billions of dollars that we're not accounting for, that we don't quite grasp that. So I think the more we can make that a normal exercise, the more people will get used to factoring that into their calculations.
Thanks for that. The next question was with regards to interdisciplinary teams. And you mentioned at the beginning that you have worked with landscape architects on some projects in the past, so you might be able to speak to personal experience, but they were wondering about what role landscape architecture typically plays in these interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah, I've often worked with teams that have water resources engineers, a geomorphologist, the ecologist, the landscape architect, possibly a buildings architect as well. And I think that's the merging of those disciplines together is where the magic happens, really, because I think if people are brought in too late, often I found, I was brought in too late to a project to really kind of make a difference, or I'm just rubber stamping something at the end, or I'm shoehorning something into a project that's pretty much done. I think if everybody can meet really at the early stage and see what they can bring, that's an added value, or that the other disciplines might not be thinking about, then that's really powerful. If we bring people too late, then they can't actually do their job properly.
That is a common concern that I hear from our members. So I'm glad that you recognize that from an external perspective as well. Another question that we have is, what are the best insertion points for the monetary values derived from nature-based solutions within an urban municipality's operational management decisions for existing natural assets?
I think I see kind of two places, really. So there's the existing asset management. So we have our existing built assets, our schools and our roads, and kind of forward planning for maintaining the services that we derive from those. But alongside that, we should have also something similar for our natural assets. So how do we maintain or even improve, because with climate risks increasing, we might need to increase the level of service we're getting on from some of our natural assets, for example, to control flooding in urban environments. So how are we going to do that, and what is our financial plan? So asset management is definitely one of the points. I think another point, though, is also when we're thinking of projects to deliver a particular added service, or a particular tackling a particular issue, making sure that we're factoring the value of what we're bringing with natural infrastructure to it as part of the option appraisal process. So this guidance that is being developed by Standards Council in coastal realms, I see being more widely applicable. We were already doing that as standard in the UK, so there's no reason why we can't do it in Canada.
Yeah, there's lots to be learned from the UK on coastal adaptation processes. Another question for you, going back towards the interdisciplinary teams theme, you mentioned balancing between engineers and ecologists, and they're wondering if you have seen these fields coming together over nature-based solutions, or do they still have different aims?
I definitely have seen teams coming much more together, and I'd say it's very dependent on personalities. You know, there's some engineers that I've worked with that I absolutely adore because they're so open to nature-based solutions and they want to invite everybody to to make a really coherent solution. And then there's still some engineers that really are not convinced and are very risk averse and don't really want to hear anything about nature-based solutions. So I said my experience has been fairly depends on the personalities in the team. But I'd say it's leaning towards the former character than the latter character now, particularly as we see many young engineers coming through the system who've actually learned in their studies about nature-based solutions as well, and more engineers who have practical experience in projects involving nature-based solutions. As we get more projects, we get more experience.
Great. This person says that they are part of an environmental advisory committee for a small city, and they're hoping to petition the committee to look at supporting a natural asset inventory and management plan for the community. And what would be the best approach to do this?
Well, a great starting point, if the community hasn't already done a natural asset roadmap, is like a really kind of a first step and can help out plan out the next steps, like see where you're at, because you obviously need a certain amount of data for a natural asset management plan. So this roadmap is, I think there are about $850, super cheap. It involves having people at the city committed to actually doing the work, because the city needs, it's not just someone external who's going to come in and do it all for you. You need the city to commit resources to it. But that would be my first step. If they've already done that, there's a whole process. So there's a kind of a step-by-step process to go through. So you need to do like an inventory, a condition assessment, and then maybe evaluation, and then integrate that into your natural asset management plan. So it's to see where you're at in that process. And to be honest, I would read the Nature is Infrastructure Guide, because that covers all of those steps.
Here's a specific question. Do any of the infrastructure evaluations include irrigation systems?
A good question. But an irrigation system itself would be not necessarily a nature-based solution, I would say. Yeah, I haven't seen that. It would depend how the irrigation system was being used, I think, as well. But I do know that because drought is becoming particularly more of a problem in the prairies, like maybe irrigation is going to be used to also maintain some of their natural habitats as well. I don't know.
And much of the loss of nature-based solutions happens on private land. How do we get private landowners to conserve or restore nature-based solutions when the benefits are more public or municipal?
Yeah, I think so. Engaging residents is super important. So I think that's why we have because they can, you know, there's a kind of a self-centered interest as well in some of these nature-based solutions, or just nature, vegetation, or having that on your property. I think businesses are like I would just have the French name PME, that small businesses are also kind of getting more sensitive to the fact that they can help manage their own risks as well using nature, and that they also, as a reputational point as well, that they're being observed of how they act with their impact on nature. So I think it's raising awareness amongst different bodies, but I think engaging people is really important, because the people vote for people, right, as well. So I think if we have an informed public, then they're likely to vote in people that are going to do the work for them.
We have a question. I'm assuming CB is cost benefit. So it was, do you have examples of CB of using nature-based solutions? But if the CB means something else, if you could put it in the chat to correct me, that would be great.
Yeah, so one of the ones I really like is the town of Percé in Quebec. So basically they looked at a coastal nature-based solution to address coastal flooding and erosion. And Jonas did it. It was back in 2016, so it's getting to be an older study now. But they looked at different options, including a seawall and beach nourishment. But they basically using cost-benefit analysis that included some of those wider benefits like gain from tourist industry, because Percé is such a key tourist hotspot. Gaining fishing productivity. So their cost benefit analysis was actually like 68-1 once they'd gone through this. So it really shows that through adaptation, you can actually make things better. And that project has been implemented, which is great. And I know my previous employers were responsible for the landscape architecture on that project. It won lots of awards as well. So I think that's a great example of where a cost benefit analysis, and I think it's also available in French and in English if you want to look that one up.
Great, that sounds like a great case study. What type of project would benefit most from the asset management or early stage nature-based solution, or what type of clients give most positive response to take actions? Any lessons learned from these conversations to help people shift their mindset?
I think municipal clients are particularly open. They're getting a lot of information about this. There's now the funding from the FCM coming for climate adaptation. So I think nature-based solutions should be really up on the table for municipalities there. I think kind of waterfront developers as well are getting much more sensitive to working with nature. I know I've worked with the Urban Land Institute and the Canadian Urban Institute there, basically development and kind of the pluses that can be, I guess, increased value from including nature as part of design as well. So I see a general more openness, whether that's in the private sector or the public sector. So I would say everybody, since we're talking about mainstreaming.
Great answer. If irrigation systems meet LEED requirements and irrigates using stormwater, does it not qualify as an infrastructure asset?
Yeah, we're getting quite into the weeds there. I guess if we're using stormwater to replace some kind of using drinking water for a solution, then that may qualify. But yeah, I don't know.
I think that's the last of my questions in the Q&A, but I did have a question for you as well, since we have 2 more minutes. You mentioned about the difference in the number of municipalities in BC and Ontario compared to the others because of the regulations that are now in place. And I was wondering if you can point to those, like, are they happening at the municipal level or the provincial level, and to speak to what is it that they're requiring and at what stage in development or projects?
So Ontario is the only province that has actually, the province has made a regulation so that municipalities have to provide an asset management plan, and that the asset management plan does need to address green infrastructure, which includes natural assets as well. There's less detail about what detailed information needs to be included in the asset plan, and it came into force this year. To be seeing what people have produced. I would also say in Ontario, it's also the influence of the conservation authorities and also kind of taking this natural asset work forward as well. So in BC, I think it's more become it's word of mouth, and it's because that's where NAI started. But we see other provinces kind of getting on board. Like for example, I'm in Quebec, and there's been definitely an uptick in interest in natural asset management. particularly because the nature as infrastructure report was translated into French. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm sure there are going to be other questions coming in, but I want to reassure everybody that's been asking about the slides and the links. We will make this video available on the CSLA website once we get a chance to format it and translate our captions so that it's available in both languages. And we will also make the slides available, which will have all the links. And then I've also been copying the additional links that attendees have shared in the chat. We can share those as well. So for those of you that weren't keeping up with the chat and the additional comments that were added, I have kept track of those. So want to thank you again for your presentation and all the useful resources. I'm sure we will have lots of follow-up. And I just want to take this minute to also promote our upcoming webinars. This is just the first in our landADAPT series. We have 3 others scheduled, and you can register online. And we had a very high registration rate for this event. We actually maxed out on the capacity, so please do register early. In January, we'll be hearing from Kelly Alvarez-Duran on carbon accounting for landscape architects. And then Pamela Conrad in February will be talking about actually using her tool that was developed in the States. Forgetting the name of it off the top of my head, positive design, climate positive design, and Fatima Saad in Parks in Action. So you can register for those now, and we look forward to seeing you again.